Hi, I'm Rohit, and this is Mind on a Leash. This course was created to help you understand and deal with your mind. An untamed mind can cause an incredible amount of suffering, from chattering endlessly, judging and condemning us, to anxiety, paranoia, depression, and various forms of mental illness. Having a mind can sometimes be a living hell. What I'm sharing here is what I have learned, along with my unique insights, realizations, and experiences. I'm not in any way saying that this is the ultimate be-all, end-all of the exploration of the human mind and consciousness. I've been teaching these concepts and techniques for over a decade, and my clients have greatly benefited. So I'd like to share them with you as well. In the past videos, we talked about the ego. And I referred to it as the virtual self. I talked about how the brain is sort of the hardware and the mind is the software of this computer that we have here, this incredibly powerful machine, I guess one could call it. And it works a certain way. It has some very unique things that it does and needs. Once we begin to view it objectively, we start to get a hold of it. The first thing it needs is to have someone who it can refer to as the operator. You see, the real operator of this mind computer is dormant. That's the authentic self, the soul, the higher self, whatever word you want to give that. But that part of us, which enters our body when we are born and leaves the body when we die, that part of us, we're not aware of it. You can access it, yes, through meditation and through various other practices. But for now, till we get to that point of discussion, I want to share with you how do you deal with the mind at a more basic and fundamental level, because learning to do that will help you actually access this true self. In the past videos, we talked about how the ego had to be maintained a certain way, because if it's kept healthy, it leads to confidence, it leads to being able to achieve the things that you want in your life, and it generally creates for a happier environment inside here. Archetypes and subpersonalities. If these are new concepts and ideas to you, there's going to be a lot you'll learn here. If these are concepts you already know about, check out my perspective on it. I think you'll learn a few things that might be new or unique to you. While computers work on software and the phones work on apps, the human mind works with archetypes. Carl Jung refers to archetypes as collectively inherited. That is to say, inherited from the collective consciousness of everybody around us, or from all kinds of inputs that we get. He refers to them as the unconscious ideas or patterns of thoughts and images that are universally present in individual psyches. There are concepts that we derived from the world around us, models, so to speak. And he refers to these also as symbols or motifs that are found in literature, in painting, in mythology. We've all watched movies or read comic books or come across the ideas of superheroes. It could be that the idea of a superhero as a male or as a female. But in any case, they've been a big part of our psyche. And many of us try to be that, either as a super mom or a super dad, or as a person going into the military or police or whatever else. We're trying to be something phenomenal. So there's so many different archetypes that then form the models on which we base our lives. The idea of understanding this is to know the patterns that these archetypes bring to us. What are their causes? What are their functions? In other words, to make the unconscious conscious. As we go through the list of subpersonalities and archetypes, I want you to reflect on how or which ones of these are dominant in your life. Let's start with the first one here, the ruler. This one is quite pervasive, as I was speaking about, for leadership roles and so on. And a ruler, if you come to think about that, is an authority figure. might be stern, might be powerful. Of course, that's the more classic image. But you could also have other kinds of rulers. The concept may have evolved over time. It doesn't have to be someone who's stern. It can be someone who's collaborative. But in any case, being a ruler inspires us. Being a leader makes us look up to someone, makes us want to be looked up at. And so we want to be in politics, and we want to be the president, or we want to be the head of a company or a CEO. In contrast to that is the artist. And that is a whole other kind of inspiration for us. That person could be an innovator. It doesn't have to be someone who's just painting on canvas or some other classical medium, but could be innovating in software, could be creative, could be a person who's a designer, from anything from fashion and garments all the way up to technology and robots, right? So there's so many different kinds of artistic expressions. The other archetype is the child. And that's a very fascinating one. The child within us is our longing for innocence, that search for playfulness, for being silly, for being reborn, for discovering ourselves, for finding new ways of being in the world. All of that is that childlike expression. Then there is the sage, the wise person. What does the sage represent? It represents seeking for spiritual knowledge, but it could also be seeking for knowledge in general. Most of us are seeking knowledge about how to succeed in life, how to be healthy. That's also part of that sage aspect or sage archetype. We seek knowledge, we seek wisdom, we seek guidance. And ultimately, of course, the sage is not just seeking all these things, but also wants to live this, wants to embody it, and wants to become that symbol of wisdom and truth and be able to inspire others. Then there is the rebel. A lot of us have this within us. It doesn't have to be some classical version of that. It's just you could be a rule breaker, a nonconformist, and at the extreme, an outcast or a heretic. Then, as I was saying earlier, there is the hero, Superman, Wonder Woman. You've got so many of these types. They've inspired movies that have made millions and millions of dollars for their creators. The hero is someone like a champion, a defender, a rescuer, even a savior. These are powerful archetypes in our life, and we have to learn to recognize them because much of what we're doing is based on this. Then there's the archetype of the lover. You might feel that in yourself. Maybe you're a romantic. Maybe you're someone who longs for intimacy, for connection. So it's a big part of you. Other people may not be wired that way, but you are. And if that's the case, then it's going to be very important for you. And if you don't get that in your life, then you're going to feel very empty because that's the archetype that's running your mind. So you see, it has a huge impact on why we seek what we seek, why we long for what we long for, and why we become what we become. The prostitute. Now, that doesn't just mean someone who's out literally as a prostitute, but it could be the fact that we have within us a part of us that is sexy, that is flirtatious, or even promiscuous. If we have it, you may find that people might shame you for that. If you don't have it, you might find yourself being critical of people who have that. Either way, it has a big influence on your life, whether you're judging people who have this flirtatious, promiscuous, sexy aspect of themselves, or if you're trying to push that down in yourself and control it. Either way, it's got its hold on you. Then amongst women, you find this very common, that's the bitch. And many people would say, oh, that's a terrible thing. But no, it may be actually a very powerful way for a woman to be able to defend herself. She is the protector, the defender, and is required because women may not have the physical prowess of a man, so they need a different kind of weapon with which to be able to protect themselves from being mistreated or being in any way abused. It's an important piece. Then there is the joker. A lot of people will use humor to deflect issues. They will try to be the life of the party through their humor, or they'll find it as a way to seduce a woman or a man. But it can also be a very childlike quality, being silly, being playful. There's elements of that as well. So every one of these archetypes has both a light and a shadow, a healthy part and an unhealthy part. The bitch, if abused, that can become a very mean-spirited person. But if used in the right way, it can be a very healthy thing. The Joker, for example, when used to avoid one's emotions or to try to avoid conflict, can become a source of problem. Whereas, on the other hand, it can be something very amusing and very beautiful. So each one of these has its pros and cons, and we need to be able to look at them from that lens. Then there is the caregiver. This part can be very nurturing and comforting, but on its shadow side, you might end up neglecting yourself, not taking care of yourself, and that can be very unhealthy because you're caring for others, but you're not caring for yourself. So more of caretaker rather than caregiver. Then there can be the saboteur. The saboteur is a part of many of our lives. This is where we need to be working, but instead of working, we're watching TV or we're doing things to escape or avoid. And these days, it's not TV so much, it's getting on your phone, on Instagram, on YouTube, on some other TikTok, right? And getting diverted from what you really need to be doing. And then later on, when you've done plenty of that, comes the next one, the inner critic. Most of us have this one. And it seems to be a very powerful force in our minds, often judging us, criticizing us, telling us what's wrong with us, and sometimes even punishing us. It can be an extremely painful archetype to live with. So these are just some of the archetypes. Reflect on the ones I've shown you so far. Maybe there are others that you might think of. Try to understand which archetype is running your life, which part of it is positive, which part of it is negative. Learning how to be able to move from the shadow side of the archetype to its light side is a big part of the journey that you have in this life. Let's talk about a much forgotten archetype, and that is the inner child. All of us have experienced being a child. When we were children, there was a part of us that was so playful, so beautiful, so adorable. We're going to refer to that as the magical inner child. We've all been there. That part of us was vibrant, full of life, curious, creative, spontaneous, playful. We also have within us the wounded inner child, which often when people come to a therapist, that's kind of what has to be dealt with. The part of us that was shamed or wounded or went through a crisis during the time when we were growing up. Too often, unfortunately, therapy focuses only on the problems and healing the wounded child. But I think it's equally important to awaken the magical inner child to accelerate the return to wellness. What is this magical inner child? How come that part of us, which was so alive when we were children, has almost died out now as adults? And why aren't we that way anymore? It goes back to the development of the logical mind and the ego, which we had discussed earlier. The world sees no use for that magical child. It tells us that we need to be serious and hardworking, not playful and silly. We have not understood the origins of the magical inner child. Within our child self lies our original or authentic self. It is that quality of the soul that was so alive when we were children, and that got buried little by little by little with the development of the logical mind. It is the treasure we've been seeking. It is what we long for. That's why people get drunk, and because it allows them to be that way. That is why we like to hang out with certain friends, because with those friends we can be ourselves. Our heart craves for that. We want to return to that. To access this inner treasure, we need to clear the mind of all the obstacles that are in the way. In the next video, we'll go into this even further and learn how to deal with our inner critic. That's going to be a big part of learning how to become free of the judgmental mind that sometimes seems to trouble us so much. Okay, that's a lot of concept. So now let's make it practical. Let's get into some journal work. And what I recommend for you is really to have a journal so that you can begin to write these things down and really see them on paper and begin to work on them in a more tangible way rather than just having concepts within your head. I find that a lot of people will accumulate information but not act on it. And my sincere, humble plea to you is, act on this information. Become aware of these things and make them concrete and real in your life. That awareness will shift everything from within. With each of the sub-personalities that you were able to relate to, ask yourself, does it remind you of any real or fictional character in a movie, cartoon, or game? Give it a name. So give it the name of that character. So whether that's your superhero character or whether that's your villain character. And then either draw it or visualize it in your mind so that you can begin to start talking back to it. So you can begin to start reimagining it and creating it differently. How does it operate? When does it show up? What is its intention or purpose? What are its opinions or beliefs about you, about people, and the world? How do they influence your thoughts and behavior? Is it serving you or not? If yes, then you want to encourage it. If maybe, then you want to challenge or reframe it. If no, then you want to delete it. You said delete it? Yeah, you can actually delete it. Any part of your mind can be altered if you learn the art of being able to step away from that thought, that belief, that archetype, and be able to observe it, be able to name it, and then be able to challenge it. Right? If it's good, if it's helping you, like, being the hero, if that makes you something that makes you feel good about yourself, okay. But there may be areas where you're overworking yourself, where you're overdoing it, where you're trying to be a savior or you're trying to be a rescuer, and that's no longer serving you. Well, maybe you want to pull back a little bit. All right? So notice these things. Notice their pros and cons. Notice where it's too much, where it's not enough, or where it's a hindrance. All of that can be dealt with. Have fun with this. This can be a pretty amazing process of self-awareness, and I tell you, it will make a huge difference in your life. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.